Hey guys, thanks for joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. If you're a returning listener, it's great to have you back. If you're new to the channel, we're really glad you joined us and we hope you like what you hear. Our podcast is for people that want to learn something new or make themselves a little bit better every day. And today we are super excited because in the history of Salty Ginger Talk, we have done a great job of finding very compelling guests who are willing to share both their victories and their hard times and how they dealt with both of those. And that tradition continues with our guest today, who is Amber Wynn. So, Amber is a philanthrepreneur. I had to practice so I could make sure I said the word correctly. She has a business that advises and helps nonprofit organizations run effectively, raise funding, set their systems up so they can be successful. She's got a long track record of success in both the nonprofit and the corporate worlds. And she's had some really challenging things happen in her life that she's willing to talk through with us, all of that. So, a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge. She's got her own podcast as well called On Air with Amber Wynn. And we're going to share all of the links. She's an author. She's written multiple books. So super accomplished lady. We're really fortunate to have her on the podcast, and we're going to bring Amber on now. Amber, welcome to Salty Ginger Talk. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You bet. So, we talked in the intro about a little bit about your background. So you are what you label a philanthrepreneur, which I've had to
Hey, you
practice.
got it.
I had to practice saying it to make sure I got it right because I'm not a silver-tongued kind of a guy. But kind of walk the listeners through what that means. Just give us a definition of that from your perspective.
Yeah, so a philanthrepreneur is a person who fuses the passion and commitment with philanthropy with proven business practices for long-term impact and sustainability.
Got it. That's beautiful. Well
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
So I was noticing as we went through and did our digging and did our research before we had you on the podcast that you've got a long background working in the not-for-profit space, but your current gig actually is not a not-for-profit, but you advise and coach not-for-profits. Do I have that right?
Correct.
How'd you get into the not-for-profit space to begin with? How'd you start your career there?
So I was a graduate of Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and I thought I'm going to graduate and go work in this high rise over in Century City. I already picked out the car, my apartment, all the things, and it did not transpire. Like I did interview after interview, and so what ended up happening because those loans were due was that my friend's sister's cousin introduced me to her sister's best friend who had a nonprofit. And I took the job because I needed to pay the student loans. And because I was an English major, they were like, oh, well, you can write grants. And I'm like, okay, I'll write grants. And so there went the story.
Got it. Yeah. And for those that don't know, so I've got a very funny story about Loyola Marymount. I went through college on a baseball scholarship
Okay.
and I played junior college for 2 years. I actually lived in the LA area, which I didn't mention that at the top here, guys. Amber lives in the LA area. And so I lived in Port Hueneme and Oxnard my first year, and then I lived in Long Beach my second year. And I pitched in an all-star game that happened to be held at Loyola Marymount University. I don't know if you ever went to the baseball field there, but it's a beautiful field surrounded by these big, tall trees. And the coach for Loyola Marymount, this was like a place where college scouts and professional scouts would come watch the games because they were looking for talent. And the coach that was coaching the team I played on remembered me from the year before because I'd pitched against his team a couple of times. And so he actually started me on the game. And I got there very late because we got lost. We were coming from Oxnard and drove down into the valley and we got lost. We were all turned around. And this was pre-internet. This was, when you still had the atlas in your car navigating
And
your
the
way around the
Thomas
town.
guide,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly right. Exactly right. So I've got about 10 minutes to warm up, and you look up in the stands, and there is literally hundreds of scouts. And the very first pitch I threw, the first batter hit it about 500 feet over the fence, foul. And I was like, man, that would have been a terrible way to start. But the first pitch I
Right, right,
threw,
right, right.
gigantic home run. But Loyola is a beautiful school. For those that don't know, it's a very prestigious school. It's small, but It's saying something that they don't let a lot of dumb people into Loyola. So that's
No, it's very academically rigorous. Yes. Yeah.
yes, for sure. An English major to boot. So good for you. So you're in the not-for-profit space. What spurred you to go out on your own? Like to walk us through what happened there.
So, right. Um, I'm from Watts, California, and nonprofits would frequently come into our community. They would do things like community gardens and all. So I knew about nonprofits, right? Because nonprofits exposed us to a lot of things. But it wasn't until I started working for the nonprofit that I got to learn about it, right? And so when I first started out, I was a coordinator, and then I advanced to, like I said, a grant writer, and then a programs administrator. A programs administrator helps to develop the programs, right? So, in different organizations, doing different roles, here was my thing. I didn't understand why, for all of these years, we have these nonprofits and we still weren't able to solve for the problems,
Hmm.
right? I knew the work that I was doing. At the time, it was Community Construction Training Center. We work with justice involved. I used to be justice involved. I was a gang member, all of the things. And so, whatever position I was in, right? So whether it was a grant writer, I'd get all this money. And then, of course, they get the money and then they start moving things around. I'm like, well, I'll be the executive director. When you become the executive director, you learn that you report to the board. And it's like, well, then I'll sit on the board. So then I sat on the board, just all of the things trying to figure out, like, how can I really make an impact in the community that is going to be sustainable? And that's the issue with nonprofits, is that the resources are not sustainable. And that's why we can't solve for the world's biggest problems. Traditional philanthropy only funds direct costs, the program costs. But your talent is an indirect cost, it's in the overhead cost, yes?
Hmm.
So if we're
Hmm.
consistently funding the direct costs, we'll never get the talent in the position that's going to solve for the problems. So in 2000, in 2010, I had a series of deaths in my family. And I had decided to try corporate America because I was tired of being poor.
Hmm.
And it did really well in corporate America because of my personality. Um, but when the deaths happened, I just checked out, right? It was my aunt, then 2 weeks later was my mom, and then, a month later was my boyfriend, and it just took me out. And so I grieved for a year. And when I came back to the world, I was like, well, what can you do? And I could do the nonprofit sector with my eyes closed, but I didn't like the grind. I didn't like the constant, begging for money. I didn't. So I decided to leverage all of my experience to help nonprofits. I set up an S Corp and I function. I make as much impact as any nonprofit. The difference is I am here to build generational wealth, and you can't do that with a nonprofit. So that's why I decided to move into the space of a consultant, leverage all of my experience, help people scale, help people grow, help nonprofit leaders to stop self-funding their nonprofits. They just needed the formula. And so I give them the formula. You just got to pay me.
That seems that seems very fair. So I don't know much about not non-for-profit sectors, and I want to talk a lot about that because you do, and I want to educate our listeners on that. But you talked about a couple of things there that I think our listeners could benefit from to the extent you're willing to talk about them. One of them was being justice involved and a gang member. So I lived in the Los Angeles area in 1991, 1992. And so
During the
I was
civil
in the Rodney King riots. I was in the middle of them. I lived in Long Beach, and we had our furniture pushed up against our apartment door, hoping no one broke in. I was in the middle of them. So I experienced that firsthand. But I didn't live there. I was a visitor. I'm from Portland, Oregon. I'd been there for about 2 years. I was a transplant. I happened to see it, but I didn't live it. If you're willing, how did you wind up involved with the gang, and how did you work your way out of that situation?
Well, let me clarify. I would consider myself affiliated. You know, my mom was a single mom. She had 8 kids, and she was serious about her kids being, educated and doing all the things. But when you live in a community where there are gangs, it's really challenging to walk the straight and narrow. You have to choose. And so for me, it was Rolling 20s, Bloods, and I was affiliated, but I went to Catholic school you
Sure.
know so there's an affiliation, and I wasn't jumped into a gang. I wasn't. But when you live in that community, you know all the shot callers, you know all the people who are right. So I would say that my gang affiliation wasn't as deep as, like, I was out gang banging and things. I was more affiliated, and after I got jumped by some Crips, I was like, and I'm good. And I'm good. But I always knew that I wanted generational wealth. I always knew, when you come from a family of 8 and you're on public assistance, you're gonna go one of two routes, and I knew that this is why I didn't become a teacher, because I didn't want to be poor, right?
Mm,
I know that I do well with wealth, because wealth gives you options, choices, and that's the life that I wanted to live. So I think more than anything, it was my desire to live a better life.
got it. So that's, I just want to recap that for our listeners real quick. So Amber just said some powerful stuff there. She was exposed to various lifestyles, right? So she's in a neighborhood where people are making different choices than her. She's got a strong role model in her mother. Her mother provides structure that happens through the family and through Catholic school. And Amber had to make choices. And she made choices to follow one path instead of another path. And it's important for our listeners to remember that you always have choices. You might not like all the choices that you have, but they're there, and you're going to have to choose, like she talked about. So I think it's a very powerful statement there by Amber that I want to make sure doesn't get lost for our listeners. So thank you so much for sharing that. We really appreciate it. Um,
Absolutely.
you then, man, that's a tough stretch. You lost an aunt, your mother, and a boyfriend within months of each other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And, I was on, in my mind anyway, I was on a fast track for leadership. I worked for a Fortune 500 at the time, Fortune 500 healthcare company. I was in the training department doing training for executive leaders. And so that was my goal. My goal was to excel and achieve, and I was doing that. But after all of the death, it was like, what's it for?
Mm,
It just changed my whole perspective of life and what was important to me. And I had to say, what is important? Nothing was. I'll just tell you, you lose your mom, you lose the love of your life, and nothing is important anymore.
yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so another good example here that Amber is so gracious to share with us. She's on a track that she's had in her mind her whole life, and then life basically kicks her in the teeth a bunch of times right in a row. And it makes you question, what am I doing and what am I doing it for? And
Right.
that's a tough, tough stretch. And you said you grieved for about a year, huh?
Yeah. So I ran. I like to travel. I went with my girlfriend to Canada. My son turned 16. I was like, let's not have a party. So we went to Hawaii for his sweet 16.
Mm,
And then I was gone to Thailand for 3 months. I did a writing residency there. And it was beautiful because I could just be me and not be the provider and not be the strong person, which I got so sick of that title, right? Um, and I just got to sit with myself and say, what is your purpose? You know, prior to all of the deaths, I'm a writer, so I'd written several books, and the only thing that brought me joy at that time was writing. So that's what I did. I pulled out my book and I started writing, and I had a scare. My mom died from breast cancer in July 2013. I found a lump, and because I wasn't working, I didn't have any insurance, so I went to a clinic, and it took them a week to get my results back. But within that
whoa.
week, I said, I said, okay, Amber, this might be it. Like
Mm.
what have you not done? And I had two sons at the time. What have you not done that if you had to take your last breath at the end of this week, would you, have regrets about? And it was just that I hadn't published my book. So I did. I published it on Amazon and then I was like, all right, I'm good to go.
Wow,
Like
that
I
is
literally was the only regret that I had that I hadn't published the book. And then after that, I was publishing a book like every year because it just brought me joy.
yeah. I'd be curious. Do you write a journal or a diary on a regular basis?
No.
Yeah, well, I don't either. And but that's
Oh,
advice. It's advice we've heard from lots and lots of mental health professionals and blah blah blah.
yeah.
That for me doesn't work. I was just curious as an English major and someone that loves the written word so much, if you did that, and if so, what you got out of it. But no big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, no, no. I have probably 15 journals around that I've started, gratitude journals. I do believe in gratitude journals, but literally I won't make it through the month.
Yeah, for me, I find gratitude in moments.
Mm,
I'll be out, like I get up really early. I'm in the grocery business by trade, and that's an early morning business because bread drivers and beer drivers start showing up at your back door at 5 a.m. and you got to be there to check the goods in and blah, blah, blah. So whether you want to be a morning person or not, you become one in the grocery business. And so I still am, even though I don't have the physical responsibility of being at a store because I run our company now. But I'll be out with my dog and there'll be deer that run across. My dog likes to chase him. The sun's coming up over the hills and there's a slight breeze. And I can find gratitude in that moment. Like, man, this is all stuff that's bigger than me. This is all stuff that's
yeah.
more important than me. So I don't write a journal, but I find gratitude in moments. It's sitting and looking over. My wife and I have been married for 32 years this August, and I'll turn and just look at her sitting on the couch and say, "Man, I'm a hell of a salesman to get this lady to stick around for 32 years. I can tell you, I can sell with the best of them."
I, I love it. I love that part. I do. I do. And I think that's what for me anyways, what it comes down to, right? Those moments in LA traffic. Uh-huh. And I'll just say, go ahead. Go ahead in front of me. I'm not in a hurry. You only got 2 blocks. It's okay.
Yes,
Go
yes, I totally get it. So, oh, great. Hey, really appreciate you being willing to share that with listeners. I think there's a lot of powerful stuff there that Amber just shared with us, which is great. So, kind of a heavy conversation. That's not a bad thing, but I want to learn more about not-for-profit stuff. So, um, I watched several of for those that don't know, and we'll put it in the show links, but Amber has a podcast called On Air, and she's produced over 100 episodes and very, very high level quality content. So congrats on putting that together.
Thank
What,
you.
yeah, what spurred that with you? What made you want to do that?
So I started off trying to write a blog, but because I was an English major, it was taking me far too long to write those articles. Because I was like, well, let me, if you watched any of my episodes, I'll pause, I'll say, I'll look to like I get to be authentically me in sharing my information. And I find that, it was just easy to do because I'm talking directly to my audience and I'm sharing information that's lived experience. So it became the vehicle that I enjoyed the most for sharing information.
Yep, that's the best part of your blog, or your podcast. By the way, I'm sorry, is it's very clear you're authentic. Like you're not faking anything on that
Wow.
podcast, and it's very genuine, which is what I appreciated the most about it. So, um,
Thank you. Thank you.
and packed with, by the way, packed with great tips on the not for profit space, if you're looking to get into that. So, how does one like what do not for profits do? Like, I sell groceries. It's very straightforward. We have 7 grocery stores on the south and west sides of Chicago. That's what we do. That's very straightforward. What is a typical, and I don't even know if typical is the right way to say it, but give us a couple examples of not for profits that exist and what they try to accomplish.
So there's a difference between nonprofits and not-for-profits. A nonprofit is a public charity. A public charity has to have a variety of funding streams and a variety of leaders in its control. Like if you had all family members on your board, then you wouldn't be a public charity. You would be a private nonprofit, right? So a public charity, the most common one is a 501c3. And that's the one that people use so that they can give their donors the benefit of a tax write-off. So the public charity, 501c3, that's the most popular one. A not-for-profit is an organization like your PTA. They function in service of, but they don't really have leadership. It's like they come together. So that's what an association is like. A not-for-profit is that. Whereas a nonprofit has a structure, it has a leader, it's usually executive director, it has infrastructure, right? So that's the
Got it.
difference between a not-for-profit and a nonprofit.
And can you think of an example of a nonprofit that you either know about or work with for our listeners to kind of identify what an organization, like an organization they might recognize a name?
Oh, yeah. So, Susan G. Komen is a nonprofit. Their purpose, their function is research to end breast cancer. And so the purpose of a public charity, a nonprofit, is for them, do research that's going to improve the public good. That's that's one of the reasons why I don't have a nonprofit is the existence of a nonprofit is for the public good. If
Yep.
you benefit personally, then it's no longer a nonprofit. So when people say things like, oh, my nonprofit, I smile because I know that they don't know. Or if they say, oh, I want to pass my nonprofit down to my child, you can't because a nonprofit's purpose is to benefit the public good. So when people say, how do I pay my board members? I'm like, is it a nonprofit board? They're like, yes. And I'm like, you don't. Because if you pay them, now it benefits them, right? As opposed to a public charity existing to benefit the public good. I want to create generational wealth. So the revenue that comes into my business, I can then use it to benefit me and to benefit my family. You can't do that with a nonprofit. A nonprofit can never be owned and it can never be created in such a space that the people who govern it, the board, get any type of benefit.
Does it have people that work full time, a nonprofit? Do they
Yes.
have like full
Yes.
time employees?
Yes, absolutely. And you have to generate revenue. A nonprofit does not mean no profit, right? It means that the profit that comes in has to go back into the organization to benefit it. Whereas with the for-profit, the money that comes in, it can benefit the owners. So that's the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit. But in a nonprofit, you need to get consistent revenue because you want to pay your staff, because you need to do things like rent buses so the kids can, go to a play or the kids can buy uniforms. So you have to generate revenue. It's just understanding that the revenue that comes in solely has to benefit the organization.
Got it. That's a great distinction. I appreciate it. And like guys, so look, I'm a pretty experienced business person and I don't know nothing about this, but we got a subject matter expert here. I only bring that up because when you have people like Amber in front of you, it's great to ask them questions and shut your mouth and learn. And you can do that anywhere in life because there's so many people. My joke is it's too bad you didn't know me when I was 20, because when I was 20, I was so smart, I knew everything. You didn't have
That's
to
right.
ask.
Couldn't tell me, look, couldn't tell me nothing, right?
You didn't have to ask
Well,
me. I just told you I knew everything.
here's the thing, people start nonprofits all the time with the misinformation, so I appreciate the fact that you're even asking the question so that you can understand how the IRS established a public charity, because people start, well, I was told, who told you that? Or I thought, why did you think that? And so they start these nonprofits with misinformation and it just takes them down the road, farther away from their mission than they thought, because they thought as opposed to understanding.
Yeah, I used to play baseball for a guy that said, "Don't think it hurts the team. Just do what I tell you." So,
So I would say, who paid you to think? Who paid
yeah.
you to think?
Oh my gosh, exactly. Where does the funding come from for nonprofits?
That is my favorite question. Funding, every nonprofit should have 10 streams of revenue. 10 in order for it to achieve its goal of sustainability. Most nonprofit founders, when they start, they think there's this magical pot of grant money waiting for them. And that's not the case. Of the top 8 funding sources for a nonprofit, grants are number 7. Grants
Wow.
should only be about 30% of your budget. Yeah, but people spend so much energy in trying to get grants. Listen, there are about 1.48 million nonprofits in this country, and there are only about 1,400 private foundations. You do the math, right? You're not going to get funded as robustly as you think they are. So the funding comes from diversifying your funding streams. You should be getting things like grants and contracts, individual donors, major donors, corporate sponsorships, advertising, a variety of funding sources to keep the organization consistently covering each one of your budget line items for the budget.
So it seems like, from what I just heard you say, outside of grants and individual donors, nonprofits chase revenue very similar in a very similar way to for-profit businesses. Do I have that right?
Except for it's harder because
Mm,
for a for-profit business, it's in exchange, right? So your vendor will give you, well, you'll pay the person, well, they'll pay you for your groceries or whatever, right? There's an
sure.
exchange. Whereas for a nonprofit, you don't really see the transformation until years later. So I was in youth development, right? I was executive director of Girls Inc. And we would pour into our girls, but you're not going to see that transformation for 10 years,
Yeah.
right? So it's not this quick, exchange. So when you as a nonprofit leader are selling your organization, selling your mission, selling your programs, you have to sell the idea of, right? So it's a whole lot harder than just a for-profit.
So you're constantly pitching. It sounds like you're constantly pitching the
Constantly,
business. Yeah.
constantly, constantly. And what people don't realize when they start a nonprofit is usually they love the direct service. They love teaching kids how to play sports. They love helping seniors, whatever. They love that part, not understanding that a nonprofit is a business. So you've got to do all the other stuff. You've got to, recruit the board. You've got to do the fundraising. You've got to do the accounting. You've got to do the marketing. You've got to do the networking. You've got to do all of the things that comes with running a nonprofit business. But all they started it for was, I want to, give food out to the people who, are experiencing food insecurity. They want to do that part, not really recognizing that all of the other things are what get you funded. If you don't have a track record of success, then a funder's not just going to write you a check. I'm always baffled by how people think, I got my 501c3. How do I get a grant? You don't. Because you don't have a track record of success. There are philanthropic people out there, but they're not dumb people. People who give out money are business people. So they're going to ask you for 2 years of financial statements. They're going to ask you for demographic information, impact reports, all of the things that say, if I write you this check for $250,000, I'm going to get a return on my investment. Grant money is not free money. And
Yeah.
I say to
That makes
people all of the time, a funder's purpose is not to fund nonprofits. A funder's purpose is to meet their funding goals. So if I want to end cancer, that's my goal. I'm looking for nonprofits to help me accomplish that. So I'm going to look for the most qualified nonprofit to help me accomplish that. People start nonprofits and think, I'm just going to get a grant because I got a 501c3. That means you're eligible. It doesn't mean that you're qualified.
mm. So it's very funny you talk about that because I've been involved in various sales aspects, among other things in my career. So I'm a problem solver. So when I worked at companies, they would move me around and say, "Hey, there's a problem that's broke. Go fix it. You got to figure it out and fix it on your own," which I enjoyed. That's not a complaint. I actually really enjoyed that part of it. But I learned sales. And one of the things I learned, I tell people you have to learn to sell without selling. And because nobody likes the window salesman that camps in your house and won't leave until you sign the contract, or the used
Right.
car sales, the hard sales approach. What you've got to do is focus on solving the problem of the customer. And in your instance, or in a nonprofit's instance, the customer is the funder. So,
Absolutely. Say
right?
it again. Say it
Yeah.
again.
The
Because what
customer
people
is the
think is,
funder.
oh, woe is us. And no. You've got to solve the problem of the funder.
Yep. And that's what I tell salespeople all the time. And the analogy that I use, I worked for a couple of years in the food service business, so supplying restaurants and hotels and places that prepare and serve food to the public. And the example we use for our salesmen was, and women, uh, don't try to sell them lettuce. Help them sell more salads, and they'll buy more lettuce from you. Right. So that's
That's
the
it.
example that we
That's
use.
it. That's it. When I'm talking to my nonprofits, I'm like, here's the thing. It's really, people get upset. Why is this organization getting funders like to fund organizations that are funded? They don't want to hear the doom and gloom. It's like, well, if you don't give us this money, then our doors are going to close and these kids won't have. Why would I hitch my horse to that wagon? If I hitch my horse to that wagon, it's going to go down. Funders want to hear hope. They want to hear inspiration. They want to see the track record that you've made the transformation that you're promising, right? Because that means that you're going to help me get closer to my funding goals.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So in your business, do you connect at all funders with not-for-profits, or do you, I'm sorry, nonprofits, or do you help nonprofits figure out how to get funding on their own?
So I do both.
Mm,
Um, I the I spent the majority of my career as a successful grant writer, but it started to get hard because I'm not the type of person who's going to take your money. Like when I was writing grants, I felt like it was my honor to help nonprofit founders bring their dreams to life. And so I knew when I looked at a organization whether or not they were going to get funded, right?
mm.
So I would spend a lot of my time building out their infrastructure so that they would be qualified. You move from eligible to qualified. So that's streamlining processes and making sure that they had systems in place so that they could, produce these financial statements, making sure that there were measurable goals and objectives, really small things that are big things when it comes to getting funded. And so I started getting burnt out on writing grants because I was doing all of this work making these organizations look good so that they could get funded, that I ended up making about $2. So then I shifted I was like, Amber, you're doing this anyway. So I shifted to teaching people how to build out an infrastructure. Because once you have the infrastructure, you now have the knowledge of how to run a nonprofit, right? Because people are making stuff up. If you are the president and executive director of a nonprofit, it says to me, you don't understand the nonprofit sector
Mm.
because the executive director reports to the president. Are you going to fire yourself? You're not, right? So just little things like that. When I was a reviewer, in all things considered, right? You have a cutoff. We can only fund so many, right? So you have to find legal reasons to eliminate. So then you start looking at things like that, you know, emails, hot mama at, go writer 33 versus Amber at Bright Horizons. Well, you don't know if it's true, but this one looks more professional. So this, like, it comes down to little red flags like that. So that's what I spend my energy on, is helping nonprofits to strengthen their infrastructure, to look the part, to give people who are business professionals more comfort in in writing that check to them, making sure that the organization looks the part.
Sure. So sorry, I have several questions. I'm trying to figure out which one to
Yeah,
ask you next. Do you find your customers, or do your customers find you? Like, do you actively seek out customers, or do you
I
see that?
do.
Okay, how do you
I
do
do.
that?
My podcast. I do a lot of live trainings. I get on podcasts. Um, but most of my new clients come from referrals from people who've either done my training or been a part of one of my courses, and they're like, "You got to go to Amber."
Got it. Yep, that's great. What is I was going to say one, but I bet you there's more than one. Give us the top three most common problems or challenges you see when you first engage with a nonprofit? Like what do they almost always have wrong that you have to help them fix?
So, number one is their budget. 99.9% of new clients or people who are looking for grants, I'll ask them a series of questions. And the first one is, do you have an annual organization budget? And they'll say, yeah. Yeah. I was like, well, how much is it? They're like, well, and if you start with well, I know that you don't have the right. Well, last year it was, well, this year we are thinking a budget is not how much you have in the bank. A budget is not how much you fundraise. A budget is how much does it cost to run your organization? And founders think, well, if it's a small budget, then there's a higher likelihood that I'll get funded. But funders are business people. And so for you to say, oh, well, it only costs me $25,000 to run my organization. As a business person, I'm saying, well, what kind of business are you running? Right. And that's
Sure.
how they're looking at your applications. But founders don't think that way. They think, well, should they be happy that the money's going to the program? No. If there is a volunteer founder, so if you're not getting a salary, you're a volunteer, right? So if there's a volunteer founder that's running the organization, I'm going to write you a check for $250,000, but there's no one there who's accountable. No. So it's a mindset shift to teach individuals to think like how a funder thinks as opposed to how a founder thinks.
Mm, funder versus founder. I got it. That's
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, that makes
yeah.
perfect
So
sense.
the budget is the worst one. I can look at a budget and within 5 minutes let you know if they are fundable. Because a budget tells a funder what the priorities of the organization is, whether or not they manage their money well, and whether it's a viable business. If in Los Angeles, your budget is only $50,000, and I'm talking about your annual organizational budget, then I'm not going to fund you. $25,000, that's not even a program budget. You see what I'm saying? So the budget is usually that number one thing that will let me know whether or not it's a viable organization. The second thing is the leadership. When people start nonprofits, they don't know that the IRS has given the board fiduciary responsibility, the legal responsibility to run that organization ethically. So if you're putting your mother, your cousin, your dad, on the board, then there's a higher likelihood that they're going to follow whatever you say versus running the organization that's going to, be objective and make decisions that's going to benefit the organization versus the person who started. So I look for the board, I look for the budget, and then I look at what is your impact? Can you quantify it? I'll ask people who've been in the business 10, 15 years. So how many people have you served? Well, they can't really define their impact. You know what I mean?
That's that's great. I can tell you right now as I sit here that in our stores in Chicago, we get somewhere between 3,500 and 4,500 customers a week that come through our doors. That's
See? So that's
that's
the impact. For
yeah.
me, I can tell you that I've worked with over 140 nonprofit leaders, and at minimum, they triple their revenue when they go through my program. I've helped them raise over $10 million. Like that's what a funder's listening for. What is
Mm,
your impact, right? And if you as a nonprofit can't even quantify your impact, then how will I know as a funder I'm going to get a return on my investment?
yes, makes perfect sense. You talked a little about oversight. How does oversight work in nonprofits? You've referenced boards several
Yep.
times. So talk through that structure a little bit, and then we'll go a little bit further in terms of government oversight.
So there's two types of oversight. There's the internal oversight, which is the board of directors. The IRS has given the nonprofit board of directors the fiduciary responsibility of oversight of a nonprofit. What does that mean? That means if anything should happen in a nonprofit, and pay attention in the news, if there's some embezzlement or if there's something, you never hear from the executive director. You always hear from the president. And that's because the governing entity, the board of directors, has the fiduciary oversight over a nonprofit. That's why before you think about joining a board, you should always make sure they have D&O insurance, directors and officers insurance, because it protects your personal assets. If there's no directors and officers insurance and something happens with that nonprofit, they're coming after the board.
Yep. So you
Yep.
know what's as I listen to you, I think I was actually involved in a situation unknowingly for with a nonprofit that you just talked about. So I lived in New Hampshire for a while, and I ran our kids' Little League, which was a 501(c)(3, and I was the
Yep.
president of the
Yep.
Little League. We had a debit card that we used for purchases. If you got to go buy whatever, hot dogs for the concession stand or chalk for the field or whatever. And it typically stayed with our treasurer, but we gave it to the equipment manager over the winter because he had to buy some equipment that we had all decided we were going to buy. Well, this guy fell on some hard times and was making
Uh-oh.
personal purchases like groceries and cigarettes and stuff
Wow.
out of the Little League account. And the treasurer, in balancing the books, found it and came to me and said, "Hey, we got a problem here. These are not purchases for the league. These are purchases for this guy's family." And so I took it to our board, and I think our board had like 14 people on it. And I was shocked that several of the people wanted to not announce it and try to kind of brush it under the rug and deal with it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
said, guys, do you remember Watergate? Well, the biggest problem with Watergate was the cover up. It wasn't the crime
Right.
itself.
That's
And
right.
I'm in no way participating in not, we're going to announce this to everybody and we're
That's
going to
right.
announce what we did about it, or we should not be on this board because we're not doing our jobs.
You're not doing your job.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what I say to people who are on boards. I'm like, listen, your role is to make sure that this organization operates ethically, right? And so if you're not looking at financial statements, how do you know what's coming out of out of the banks, right? And so it is the board's responsibility to oversee the nonprofit. Now, on the government side, you have state, federal, and local oversight. You have authorized agencies. People think, oh, I just need to file my 990s to the IRS. That's just one. That's the federal level. You also have DOJ, Department of Justice. People don't know that, but they're looking at how you are ethically managing your finances. So that's the federal level. On the state level, you have the Secretary of State and the State Franchise Tax Board, because when a nonprofit is incorporated, it incorporates as a nonprofit. That says to the Secretary of State, you don't get any taxes from me for the money that I generate, right?
Yep.
If you, for example, get money that is not directly in support of your mission, a nonprofit has to pay taxes on that. So when you fail to file with the Secretary of State and the State Franchise Tax Board, they will issue letters of not in good standing. And that means you now don't have the same privileges of being tax exempt, and you have to start to pay taxes, right?
Ooh.
And they can also revoke your tax exempt status. On the local level, it's the Attorney General's office. So if you are fundraising in any shape, form, or fashion, whether it's a GoFundMe online, whether it's casino night or a gala or whatever, you are required to register with your Attorney General's office, so that because they are the enforcers who are there to protect the consumers. So for those people who are, doing tax fraud or whatever, the Attorney General will come after them. So those are the three levels, federal, state, and local, that a nonprofit is required to file with, to make sure that they are operating in the manner in which the IRS says that a public charity is supposed to operate.
Wow, that's that's a lot of layers there, huh?
Yeah, and when people come to me all the time, they're like, "Oh, I've been writing for grants and I haven't gotten." The first thing I do is I run their tax ID number. 9 times out of 10, I usually get about 30% where their tax exempt status has been revoked and they don't even know it, because all
Mm.
they know is that no, I've been filing my 990s, but they haven't filed with these other entities. So they've revoked their tax exempt status. And it's a beast to get your tax exempt status reinstated. We usually just tell people to dissolve it and start over. Like, that's how challenging it is to get it
Wow.
reinstated.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So you you talked earlier about courses and trainings that you put on. How did for your customers, how did you
Yeah.
develop that curriculum? How did you put it together?
I was pissed off. The majority of my content that is public facing and for sale or whatever, it has come out of a personal experience. For example, I have what's called the Fund Development Plan. It's a one pager, and basically it helps to get your board engaged with fundraising. That came as a direct result of being an executive director and my board always saying, Amber, can you come with me to lunch to talk to this potential funder? In the beginning, it was fine because I just wanted the money for the organization. But at some point, I'm like, you're the board. Like, why can't, that's your job, right? So I would create these resources, here you go. So the course came because what I learned is nonprofit consultants are generally subject matter experts in a little area, right? So let's just say if you are a grant writer, you're going to say to the founder, hey, I can write you a grant, and you're going to write the grant. But the grant may not get funded because you don't have the infrastructure. Or you may be a funding strategist. And so you're just like, oh, you just need a strategy, or, you just need these corporate sponsors. If you're on social media, you'll see these individuals who are promoting just this one thing. The problem is the pain point is the revenue, but the problem is not the revenue. The problem is the infrastructure.
Sure.
So I said, you know what? Let's just put together the whole dang thing, right? Let's, from concept, if you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, to actually incorporating the nonprofit, to how to select the board members, to creating your programs, the measurable goals, the objectives, to actually hiring people, your workforce, and then your departments like HR. And like, I built the whole thing out because right now there's tons of free information on the internet. Most founders, because they're usually working a day job, they don't know which comes first. This, that, and they start in the middle. Instead of building out their organization, they just form the organization. So they have a lot of the foundation that's missing. So the courses were designed to take people through how to run a nonprofit from beginning to end, because there's just so much information out there. You just get lost.
Sure. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So you had said that, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but you had talked some pretty serious success of the folks that go through your program. Run us through those numbers again, because I can't
Yeah.
remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, no. So I've worked with over 140 nonprofits in my career. And the Nonprofit Mastery Academy has seen lots of success with its graduates. Over 80% of the graduates triple their revenue once they go through the course. And that's primarily because now they know what they're doing.
Right.
Right? They have the resources, they have the tools. They're not just dependent on grants. They understand that they have to diversify their funding streams, and they have the tools in which to do it, right? They understand that as a founder, you're supposed to be in partnership with your board members. So now they're in partnership, and the board members, they're helping to lift that load. So it's because they have a clear understanding of what the IRS expects, what the funder expects, what they're supposed to be doing. They'll say all the time, my board won't fundraise. Well, do you know what that entails? Because if you're just showing up every board meeting saying you need to fundraise, but not giving them anything to fundraise around, you know? So, yeah, I've helped nonprofits raise over $10 million probably in the last 5 years, to support their organizations. And it's because they do the work, because it's not easy. It's not like you're literally running a business. I think the beautiful thing about it though is you have the roadmap. You know what to do, when to do it, and what in which order, right?
Yeah. No, that's awesome. How, what is the typical structure of a board? How many people? Where do you find board members? How do you help nonprofits put that together? Or what do you suggest? I
So
guess is a better way to ask it.
So you're legally required to have three members: the president, the treasurer, and the secretary. That's your executive board, right? Legally, three members. You always want to have an odd number. If I am choosing between two organizations that I want to fund, I'm going to look for the board. If they say we have four members on one and the other one says we have five, I'm going to go with the organization that has five. Why? Because the odd number breaks the vote. If you have
Mm,
an even number, I know that you don't know that you're supposed to have an odd number to break the vote. So it's just these little red flags. I know it's silly, right? It's
No, it
silly.
makes perfect sense.
So I typically recommend when an organization starts to have like 7 members or 11 members because the board is responsible for fundraising. So if your board is a seasoned board, they will understand that. But if not, here's what I want you to think about. If your budget is $250,000, it is the board's responsibility to fundraise to cover that, right? So if you only have 3 people, that could be a heavy lift. But if you have 5 or 7 or 9 or 11, it's going to be easier. Every board should have what are called board dues. And how do you calculate that? It's usually 10% of the annual budget divided by the number of board members. So if you only have 3, 10% is 25,000. Yes. You're going to divide that by 3. That could be a heavy lift versus if you divide it by 11 or 7. So it's just helpful to have more than 3. You don't want to get outrageous and have like 25 because that's hard to manage. It's hard to create a culture with that many. So I recommend between 7 and 11.
And where do you find board members? Like, who's a good candidate to be a board member at a nonprofit?
This is one of my favorite questions. So I like to go to corporations and ask the HR department if they have any leadership programs. Because if you get a board member from a corporation that sits on your board, it's a high likelihood that the corporation will pay for the board dues, right?
Mm,
And even if they don't, if let's just say let's just say I work for Microsoft and I sit on your board, there's going to be a higher likelihood that I'm going to have access to the Microsoft, suite, right? So you want
yeah.
to get people on your board who are going to not only be able to contribute financially, but who can also bring resources. Another great place to recruit is associations because they're used to paying dues, right? If you're a part of an association, you're going to pay dues, but also they have resources. Let's just say if you have a STEM program and the association is the Association of Engineers. So you've got a person who's on your board, you're going to have a STEM day. They can then reach back to their people and say, hey, I need some volunteers to come and help us. So it's about revenue, yes, but it's also about, human capital and resources. The other place I tell people to look are on walls. Have you ever been to like a hospital and there's a wall of donors?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Get out your phone, take a picture, go look them up on LinkedIn. Because if they're on a wall, that means that they've given, right? So you want to get people who are comfortable and used to giving. So those walls of fame are perfect. LinkedIn also has a whole section just for boards if you're interested in recruiting board members. The last place I'll say is there are board training organizations out there. In Los Angeles, we have the Reardon, we have Junior League. You want places where people, if they're going through these trainings, they're serious about being board members. They've put in the time to finish these board training programs. So those are always good to recruit from as well.
Got it. So, what have I not asked you about nonprofits that you think is important for our listeners to understand about nonprofits? Now, I'm a great question asker, so maybe there's nothing, but I'd be shocked if I got it all with the knowledge that you have.
So here's the thing. People start nonprofits typically because there's a missing in their community, or they've had a personal experience, or they want to make a difference in their community. When people come to me and they haven't started a nonprofit, I try to talk them out of it. I do. I do. We don't need another nonprofit. We don't. We have 1.4 million and every year is like, 2,000 more. We don't need another nonprofit. What we need are people who are going to support the nonprofits that are already doing the work. What I would say, especially to entrepreneurs, is don't start a nonprofit. Do what the ultra wealthy do. Open up a donor advised fund, get your 60% immediate tax write off, and invest and then use that money to contribute to a nonprofit that's already doing the work. But don't contribute just to the direct cost. Contribute to where it's going to make a difference, which is the indirect cost. The ultra wealthy have donor advised funds that by law, they only have to give out 5% annually. That's one of the reasons why we can't make a difference. I'm challenging entrepreneurs. If you're going to save 60% of your revenue, you can give 30% to philanthropy. And if you are funding indirect costs, you're really going to transform communities. Because you know what also is in indirect costs? Vacations, retirement, health benefits. Nonprofits, your typical grassroots nonprofits, they don't take vacations. They can't afford to, right? So 54%, that's the burnout rate in nonprofit. It's higher than any other sector. So if you just took $5,000, and you specifically said, I want this to fund rest, meaning I want this to fund indirect costs, you could fund someone's vacation for 1 week with $1,000. So you could fund 5 vacations. So
Mm.
I've just been encouraging people not to start nonprofits, especially for entrepreneurs, especially in this uncertain economy. You want to keep as much of your money as possible, but you also want to make a difference. So give to the organizations that are already doing the work, but give it where they need it most, which are the indirect costs.
Wow. Good stuff. Awesome. So I want to pivot back to some more personal stuff now. So I never asked you what your book was about. What was your book about that you published?
So I have like 5 books on Amazon right now. Yeah, that's my happy place. The
Mm.
first book, one that I told you about, the one that saved my life, it's called A Soft Place to Fall, and it's romance. I also have a thriller, I have a coming of age, I have an anthology, and I have a how to survive corporate America. But on the nonprofit side, I have 5 books up there that help nonprofit founders to generate revenue. One focuses on if you are nonprofit led. People think that, oh, we're all volunteer driven. That's not a good thing from a funder's perspective because a volunteer can come and go, right?
Yeah, sure.
But
Right.
if you have paid staff, then there's accountability. So at least if you have a volunteer program where you train your volunteers and all the things, at least you have structure. So I have a book on how to create a volunteer led program, Giving Tuesday, one about how to run fundraisers the right way, because people will honor me or honor you, and we can't fill tables. Well, maybe you can, but I can't fill tables, right? So just understanding the theory behind, how to run an effective fundraiser. All the things I wish I had had when I was an executive director. I was an executive director when I was 28. And, in our 20s, we knew everything, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So the books that I have out there are really designed to support the executive director. I have experience from all, positions, but my heart goes out to the executive director because the weight of that organization really falls solidly on their shoulders.
Sure. Well, shoot, with that many books, so it seems like your passion for English and writing has never left you. Is that true?
No, it's true. It's true. I don't write grants anymore. I did a referral, and then the grant writer didn't show up. And in 2 weeks, I had to write that grant. And I was pissed. I was pissed because, of course, that was my name that was on the line because I referred her. And
Sure.
then I never write a grant in 2 weeks. Like I never, but I did. She got funded. She got funded, but it said to me, "Oh, Amber, you didn't lose it. You didn't lose it. You still got it."
Still got the touch. Still got the
That's
touch.
right. Yes,
I,
yes.
I love it. What do you like to do when you have free time? What are your go-tos? What are your hobbies, habits? What do you enjoy doing?
I love Audible. So I'll do a twofer. I'll put my Audible on and I'll walk around the track, right? And so I get
Yep.
my steps in, but I get my juicy story in. Um, uh, Because I am an entrepreneur, I spend a lot of time behind the computer. So I like to be social. I get out, I hang out with my girlfriends, and I like to travel a lot. I've been to a lot of countries, and so that's my happy place too, traveling. The last place I went to was Greece, and before that it was Costa Rica, and then we did Jamaica. So I love to travel.
What is it about traveling that you enjoy so much?
I think just learning about new cultures. I am 100% confident that if people traveled more, we wouldn't have the issues that we have in this world because you get to see people in their element. Well, I take that back. I have been to countries where we as Americans have gone over into other countries and just completely disregarded culture. So for those of us who understand, that different people have different lived experiences and respect that,
Yeah.
I just think we get to learn so much. Like in every state that I go to, I'll get on how they have the red buses that'll take you
Yep.
around the city. Yeah, to learn about how these cities are formed and to learn it's 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 fascinating. I do the same thing in other countries. I want to get tours about like how the countries formed and how the governments formed, and I'll go hang out where the locals are. I just love learning about new people and new cultures because it's just marvelous.
Yeah, that's no, that makes perfect sense. And I couldn't agree with you more that familiarity is kind of the key to breaking down a lot of the communication issues
Yeah.
that the human race just has, right? So I always think back, like that's one of the reasons I was so happy I was involved in athletics. And um, when I played on lots of different teams with lots of different guys, and some were X ethnicity, some were X religion, some were X financial position their family was in, from rich to dirt poor. And
Yeah.
none of that mattered when we all put
None
on
of
the
it,
same
right?
uniform, right?
None of it mattered. It was about the team. It was about winning, right? None of it
Exactly.
mattered. Same for me. I was football is my number one sport. My mom and my relationship became a little bit rocky when she made me stop playing football. Like I just ugh. So to be as close to football as I could, I became a cheerleader. But I did volleyball, I did track, and being on a team, it's like music. It just eliminates all of those things that are barriers. So I think you're absolutely right with that.
Yeah, it's universal. It made me think of it when you were talking about what you enjoyed most about travel. That's great. What if you had to pick your favorite travel experience, what would that be? Not necessarily a country, but just like your favorite travel experience in general. What was it about it that made it so good?
My favorite travel experience was Jamaica, and it was the top of 2024. And what made it so good is because this was the first time that I actually traveled in luxury. We got a villa and we had a cook, we had two maids, we had a butler, we had a driver, and it was the first time that I actually did nothing. Like they would say, no problem, no problem. I'm like, well, can I get this drink? Yes. Can you not put so much? Like, I'm really picky. Can you not have my food touched? My food was prepared where it didn't touch. Everybody else, they didn't care. It was on top of this and that, like that, you know? And to get up and say, hey, can we go to the grill today and not have to coordinate? Yes, the driver took us there. So it was just the experience of really just being able to decompress and not worry about a thing. You could think it up and they'd be like, yeah, we'll get it for you. That was amazing to me.
Well, and hey, Amber knows how to live, people.
Yes, she does. Amber works hard, but Amber plays hard.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Look,
What about the
growing
flip
up
side?
and being a single mom, I learned that, I am a better person when I am a relaxed person, and I'm
Sure.
relaxed when I travel. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. What about your least favorite travel experience? What's your travel nightmare? What's your travel horror
So
story?
we went to Costa Rica last year in August, and it was horrible. It was an Airbnb, and the pictures were all doctored, like the The furniture was stained. Oh, it was gross. There was like algae in the pool. I got bed bugs. I just got all bit up. It was horrible. It was
Ooh,
the worst.
yeah,
Yeah.
that that makes perfect sense. Good
Yes.
Lord.
Yes. It was awful. It was awful.
Got catfished by Airbnb. Holy smokes.
Yeah. The bed bugs were the worst. I threw out all my luggage. I was like, I'm not going through that. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. So, in terms of coping mechanisms, right? Life can get tough sometimes, life can get hectic sometimes. What are some coping mechanisms that you use to kind of get recentered, to deal with stress or problems, to kind of keep your wits about you when things are crashing down around you? How do you cope with that?
So a few things. First, I meditate. Meditation is the one thing that will stop my mind. I'm a fixer. I'm a fixer. I'm a closer. I'm solution oriented, right? And so no matter what, my brain goes to, how do we fix it, right? And so meditation slows the brain where you just observe the thoughts and you let the thoughts go. So at night when I can't sleep, I will meditate just to get my mind quiet. I also like to walk. I find that when I walk, it gets the endorphins going and I just get to relax. My shoulders drop. I'm getting some physical activity in. I'm getting some air in. I'm listening to the birds. So I love to walk. But I'll say in terms of stress release, it's really surrounding myself with like-minded people. I can't deal with a lot of negative people, people who are always whining and seeing the worst of things. It brings my energy down.
Mm,
So being around like-minded people who are forward thinkers, who are either the glass is half full or we're all in this together. Like I love talking to people who have different perspectives because they usually will give me a different way of approaching something or thinking about something. And so that really is one of my best, I think, coping mechanisms, is to be able to talk it through. Because sometimes you can just run it in your head over and over. And I don't know about you, but for me, it's like it's not true, but it's just going cycling in your head. But when you talk to somebody, they're like, did they say that? Well, no. Well, then what, So
absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because so my wife and I will, assuming she doesn't leave me before August, will be married 32 years in August. And
Oh, congratulations.
yeah, thank you. Um, one of the things we do when we have conversations with each other is we'll repeat back what we heard because what you and I'm super left brain, super literal, and I'm like you. I go directly to how can I solve this problem, which isn't always what my wife wants. Sometimes she just wants to tell me
Oh,
stuff,
just
have me
wants
shut
to
my
tell you
mouth.
stuff.
Yep, exactly. And so I will ask her sometimes in a conversation, is this something I should respond to or am I listening? She'll say, just listen.
Exactly.
I can do it.
Exactly.
Got it. I know what the assignment is now. I'm good there.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but before I respond to stuff, one, I pause. And it's something I've learned over so in my career, I've negotiated literally thousands of things. Trade funding, contracts, agreements, blah, 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 blah. And one of the things I've learned is it's almost always better to pause for about 5 seconds minimum before you respond to something
Yes.
for a couple of
Yes.
reasons. One, it gives the other person the perception, even if you didn't listen, it gives the perception that you did.
That you did.
And now I'm a pretty good listener, but none of us are perfect, right? And then I want to say, what is it that I heard and kind of regurgitate it in a way that's different, not word for word what they said. What I think I heard you say is, and then I'll say it. And then
Yeah.
they can confirm, yes, that's exactly what I said. And my wife will do the same thing with me. Now, it's very funny because it took my wife a couple of years after we got married to understand there's no ulterior motive with me. Like right, wrong, or indifferent, you get the unvarnished truth. And I say that and people are like, oh, well, you just think you're better. No, that's not always a good thing, by the way, to just hammer people with the truth because most people don't like to hear the truth.
They don't.
So No, you're not popular a lot of the times when you just tell people the truth. I can just tell you that from firsthand experience. Fortunately, I was born with the I don't give a fuck gene, so um it
It
is what it
helps,
is.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, right?
yeah.
Exactly. But being able to recap that and say that back to people is a great way to communicate. So I love that you talked about um, talking to people with different points of view. And I think it's one of the problems, at least in our country right now, is there's this polarization. And
Yes.
what I use to kind of explain it to people is I'll use the Second Amendment, which doesn't sound like it should be a place to find common ground, but I think it does because regardless of whether you're a staunch gun control advocate or a staunch Second Amendment supporter, nobody wants innocent people, especially children, to be shot.
God,
We
exactly.
all have that in common. Where we disagree is the solution. But if
Mhm.
we start from the place that we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, we can have productive and meaningful conversations. If we just call each other names and refuse to listen to the other point of view,
And we get
we're
nowhere.
yeah, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that and just point it out to listeners, like, so we just we just heard Amber talk about the ultimate vacation in the Bahamas. So we know that she's successful and we know she's worked her way to the spot she is at in life. She talked about many of the things we talk about regularly on the podcast: meditation, getting outdoors, physical exercise, all as stress relievers, as well as connecting with other people. So we preach those things over and over and over again on the podcast. And so, not rehearsed, I'll guarantee you, Amber didn't go through and watch all 200 plus episodes of Salty Ginger Talk to find out what we tell you guys on a regular basis. But it's not a mistake that a super successful person that's sitting in front of you right now just talked about the things we try to put in front of our audience on a regular basis. So I just want to point that out because unrehearsed, but super brilliant. I don't think it's a mistake, that you wound up where you're at with stuff. So where are your kids at in ages? Are they getting ready to leave the nest, or how's your situation with them right now?
So my oldest son is 32 and my youngest son is 27. And I have a grandson who's
Oh,
9.
congratulations.
Thank you. I love him.
Yeah.
I love him the best. And I used to have different expectations. Listen, when I was 16, I dreamed about leaving my mom's house and I went off to college, and when I had to come back, it was like horrible. But I don't know, where are you again?
I'm in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay, but we probably could buy land in Cleveland for the amount that we have to pay for rent here in LA. It's just ridiculous.
I'm
So,
I'm sure that's right. I actually think that's
yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So what me and my girlfriends constantly complain about is, the housing market. It's not like how we were when I graduated from college. I could purchase a condo for 945 a month. Like that's how much they're renting, rooms out now, like 950. So my boys
Right.
are my boys are in that little precarious situation where they can't quite afford to be on their own. So, they're here with me in my
Yep.
phase. Yeah. Mhm.
So does your grandson live with you too?
Yes, he does. He goes back and forth between his mom and his dad. So he's here 50% of the time. But, earlier in the episode, I talked about building generational wealth, and, that's part of it. If My dad was the first African American welder in the Valley, but he also was a sexist. He should have taught me how to weld and then pass down his business, and it didn't happen. So, I had to figure out what my life was. And I was an employee longer than I was an entrepreneur. I've had technically, like when I actually incorporated my business, was in 2017. I've been doing the work for 30 years. I've always had a side hustle because I was a single mom, but my goal is generational wealth so that the boys and then my grandson and subsequently, their offspring can own some real estate. I don't know that it will be in Los Angeles because who the heck can afford that? But somewhere where they can lay their head and call their own.
It is crazy that what has happened with real estate prices in several of the large cities in our country, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, New York.
Yes, yes.
I don't know how people live in those places. It's wild.
Like five, six families in a home because it's just ridiculous. It really, really is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. So yeah, so kids grown up. Um, what's next for you? How do you see the next 5, 10 years of your life playing out? What's on your wish list?
So I'm in the process of not working so hard. In my 20s, I could push through, but like 9 o'clock rolls around and I'm just like, oh my God, it's late. So I need to switch from having as many active streams of revenue, meaning I have to show up. Even with my course, I show up once a month so that the people in the course can ask me questions. It's self-paced, but I want to be available for them because there are things
Sure.
that just aren't clear. Um, I do live trainings, board trainings, executive director training. So those require me to be present. I'm exchanging dollars for time. In this next phase of my life, I want to do more things that are passive. I want to own a couple of, ATM routes. I want to purchase a vending machine for my grandson so that he can earn his own money.
Yep.
Um, you know what I want to own? I want to own a mobile estates. I want to own like where there's modular homes. Like I want to do those types of things. I want to purchase real estate because I want to start to ramp down because I've been doing a lot of going, 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 going. And I want to I want a private jet.
I love it. You
I
on
want to
the
travel your private jet, like going through all of the things that you have to go through to get to these countries. It's exhausting sometimes.
I
So I want
bet.
to be able
Yeah.
to create a flight plan and get on my private jet on the tarmac and just go.
That makes perfect sense. It's interesting you brought up the mobile estates. I actually know a guy that has built a huge portfolio of mobile estates. He's bought them all around the country and he has done so well for himself. And I think a lot of it is
Connect us.
because what's that?
I said, you'll have to connect us.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I will.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but I think it's because of what you talked about. The affordability of housing has created a situation where people, I think rightly, the like, so I've done all sorts of stupid stuff in my life, and we built a big old house that was way bigger than it needed to be, and sold it, moved from there, and we just live in a small little house now.
Downsize.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much upkeep and to keep it clean and do all like it. I'm super cheap, so like I'm cutting the grass, I'm doing the all the maintenance stuff.
All the things,
Um,
right? Yeah.
yeah, because I'm not gonna pay somebody to like, I'm not doing that. I can do that myself. I have 3 boys, I'll get them over here, you know. But now people look at it and say, hey, I just need somewhere to sleep and shower and somewhere that I can stay warm and safe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the mobile estates or mobile complexes make a ton of sense to people, you know?
Yeah. They make a
You
ton of
know,
sense to me because at the end of the day, I'm not a listen, I'm just going to be a little bit, forthright and let everybody know. Another coping skill I have is called retail therapy. So those tiny homes, they don't work for me. They don't work for me. But a mobile estate, those modular homes, like they are decent in terms of space. Like you're not like all crammed like in a tiny home. You got to, I think the tiny homes are cool because they have a lot of things that, close in or whatever, but like the mobile estates are just enough size for you to spread out, but it's not too big, the upkeep, you may have a little patio or a little runner thing or whatever. It's cool. I like it.
yeah, for sure. Have you flown on a private jet before?
No,
Mm, it's a good
no,
goal. I like your
it
goal.
is. Yes, yes. And even if, like, I don't know that I would travel enough to really justify the purchase of one, but they've got these services out there now where, you can charter one. So I'm down for that.
Yes, you can charter. There's also fractional ownership. So there's several different ways to do it. I have so I've flown on private jets before because I worked for a company that had two planes. And so if we were once I made it high up enough up the food chain, I could catch a ride. I was never, important enough to be able to call up and say, I'm taking the plane here. But if it was going the same direction I was, or if I was on the group, I would fly on the plane. And you're absolutely right. The convenience of it is insane. So there's
Insane.
no parking at the airport. There's no security. There's no anything. You show up, you park your
And you walk
car.
into yeah,
That's exactly right. And then when you're
that's
done,
like I need to live.
it was a very nice convenience. Now, with that said, we traveled a ton because that company had 60 facilities across the country and we had customers all over the country and blah, blah, blah. So it made sense. And the one guy that owned it was a multi billionaire. So we were fortunate that he bought the plane for his travel, but then used it for the business as well because he was a smart
Exactly.
guy, obviously. But
Our guy. It's just like you do with your cars, right? I
yep,
need to go places, but I'm going to put it under, my company name. So yeah.
yep.
It's the same thing I tell entrepreneurs. Yes, we want you to give back. We want you to have a corporate responsibility initiative. Don't start a nonprofit. Start a donor advised fund because it's going to give you the tax benefits, but it's also going to allow you to contribute to the organizations already doing the work out there.
Well, you had talked earlier about being in corporate America and not liking it, and you'd also said you wrote a book about surviving corporate
Yeah,
America, and I did that for quite a while. And look, it pays well, and I know really good people, and I have nothing bad to say. I have nothing but good things to say about all of the people that I've worked with in the past. But it's a very unfulfilling existence from my
it is.
experience. Yeah.
It is. It's unfulfilling, it's stressful. And, I mean, I'm grateful because the deaths took me on a different path because I would come home stressed out, tired, thinking about the next day. Like it was very challenging to be present. You
Mhm.
know what I mean?
Yep.
And so I I'm I'm glad that you have positive things to say because it was a very toxic experience for me.
Yeah, well, I've always tried to find the silver lining in the clouds. Um, I wouldn't be where I'm at without the experiences that I have, so I'm very grateful and thankful for that. With that said, it was not all rainbows and unicorns. There was there was plenty of problems and challenges in that world. And the biggest one I had was like I talked about. At the end of the day, what am I doing this for? You said it very early on in the podcast. Why, the unfortunate series of deaths that you experienced made you question, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I doing this?
Right, right. For a title? Really?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly.
No, yeah. So I also think that, it's important. Listen, that philanthrepreneur, um, a huge part of that is the entrepreneurial side, and that I got a lot of experience in corporate America about how to streamline processes, about how to create a value proposition. All of those things I parlayed into the nonprofit sector because I felt that it was missing. But with that added formula, it just makes a nonprofit more competitive because you're speaking the language of the funder. So I cannot not acknowledge that part, right? It's the secret sauce in what all of the things that I do.
But you don't gotta like it. Nope, I totally understand that. Makes perfect sense to me. So, what, as it relates back to your business, what would you suggest to our listeners if, well, so it's kind of a trick question because you've already said you try to talk people out of starting not for
I do.
profits
I
when they come to you. But if one of our listeners had this great idea for a nonprofit, what would be a good way to engage with you to kind of float that idea or at least to have a preliminary conversation with you?
Yeah, I mean, your listeners can reach me. I have uh, what do you call it? A calendar on my website. My website
Hmm.
is www.amberwynn.net, and you go work with me, and you can schedule a free 15-minute call. And I'm always happy to talk to new people, especially, I mean, even if you've been in it for a while, people will be like, I'm gonna lose my husband because he's like, you keep putting all of this money into this nonprofit, right? And so, one of the things that I have a whole a whole series on alternatives to starting a nonprofit. You could do a giving circle, right? You could sit on the board. You could be a volunteer. There's so many things that you can do besides starting a nonprofit, including opening a donor advised fund and funding other organizations. But if you have that drive in your heart, I'm never going to discourage anybody not to do that because those things are put into your heart for a reason. I'm here to discourage you if you are thinking to start a nonprofit for the wrong reasons. I'm going to give you the truth. If after I give you the truth, you still want to start a nonprofit, then I'm going to give you the roadmap to do it the right way.
Got it. That's great. That's great. And then, is there anything we haven't talked about on this episode that's important to you or a topic you want to talk about that we haven't covered yet? I open the floor. I do this with all our guests for anything. If you want to say some words to the listeners to leave them with, or if you have a topic we haven't talked about, the floor is yours.
I would just like to say to the nonprofits out there who are nervous and scared about their nonprofits, because nonprofits are under attack right now under this administration. And so they've been scrambling, trying not to use the buzzwords and trying to, I would just like to encourage them to just be still. If you're going to do anything, don't change who you are, because the minute you change who you are, you no longer have documented proof of your success, right?
Mm,
If you've been providing services to spotted tigers and now you're like, "Oh, we provide services to all the tigers." You don't have a track record for that. And that's what donors use to determine if they're going to fund you, is your track record of success. If you're going to do anything, focus on tightening up your infrastructure, making sure that you have a funder ready budget, making sure that you have seasoned board members, making sure that you have systems in place that can deliver the financial statements and the impact report. Like, seriously, focus on building out your infrastructure, because here's what I can promise you: the need is not going to go away, the need is going to get greater. These 10,000 nonprofits that have these 10,000 people who have been laid off from nonprofits, the thousands of people that have been fired from these government agencies, who's going to take care of them? It's the nonprofit sector. It's not
mm.
government, and it's not the private sector. It's the nonprofit sector. So the need's going to just grow. The difference is going to be who is going to get funded. That is going to be determined by your infrastructure. Before, people could get contracts based off of relationship, but because this administration is scrutinizing the foundations now have to scrutinize who it is that they fund. So if you're
Mm.
going to put any time and effort into anything, put it into strengthening your infrastructure so that you can pass any type of audit and eligibility and compliance screening.
Wow, great stuff. Well, Amber, I just want to thank you again for joining us on the podcast and taking this time with us. We have a pretty great track record of guests, so the expectation is pretty high, and you absolutely killed it. You were so good on the podcast. We appreciate you being willing to share some of the candid stories and candid things that you had to fight through in your life, and talk about your successes as well and the things that you've learned. And I just think overall it was a great, great episode. And we just want to thank you again for coming on and having the conversation with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been one of my most favorite podcasts. It's been fun and authentic, and you're a hoot.
Well, glad you enjoyed it. We will keep tabs on you and reach
Okay,
out somewhere down the road, and maybe we'll revisit it and have another conversation.
I'd love to.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Amber.
All right. Have a great one.
All right, you too. All right, guys. So, we hyped Amber up ahead of the podcast, and clearly she did not disappoint. She absolutely killed it with all of the information she shared. Clearly, a subject matter expert on nonprofits and everything that goes on in that space. She was also candid about challenges that she faced in her personal life, including a very hard stretch where she lost several people very, very close to her, and talked about what that made her think and how that made her pivot in her life and her career, and just was super authentic, super candid, and we just were really pleased we were able to have Amber on. So kudos to her. We're going to post all of the information to her business, her books, her website in the show notes so that if you want to connect with Amber, you're able to do that. And then James posted up here every day. Head over to our website, saltygingertalk.com. All of our podcast episodes are available there. We've got links to all of our social media accounts there, and we publish a newsletter every weekday that you can subscribe to on our website as well. So, really appreciate you joining us. Don't forget, like, comment, share, subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you consume it on. It's super helpful for us if you're able to do that. Great job by Amber. We really enjoyed the conversation and think you'll get a ton out of it when you watch the episode. So, everybody have a great week, and we will see you on the next one.